Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Um, we are the Colorado Snowsports Museum. How many people here tonight are members? Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you. So, our members probably know this, some others might not. This year, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary. So, tonight, you are here for our final Through the Lens presentation, but we do have some other events coming up. So, be sure to check our website, check your email, check your spam folders. We've got a few free events coming your way, 50th anniversary events and member events as well. Mark your calendars. And thank you so much to our members for your help. It is only with your contributions and your support that we can stay open and free, and that is our goal. And for those of you that aren't members, I am your girl. Come talk to me after we're done tonight, and I can help you with that problem. The you can join the family tonight. So we're super excited. Here tonight, we have John LaConte. He is a local author. He is a Vail Daily reporter, and he's here to talk with us about his first book. Also have to thank our board members here tonight, Hall of Fame member Chris Anthony, and also the town of Vail, who help us make this program possible. So thanks again for coming, and without further ado, here is John.
Thanks, Whitney. Thank you for that introduction. Hello and welcome to everyone who's here. As Whitney mentioned, we're here to talk about Sir St. George Gore. That is the man who the Gore Range and Gore Creek are named after. We have done a couple of these talks already at the ski museum here, and so Jen asked me to share some stuff that didn't make it into the book, that is some more kind of behind the scenes things and process stuff. But at any time, if we need to sort of go back to the basics and explain a little bit more about who Gore is, or any context that we're missing, go ahead and stop me and raise your hand and ask a question. By all means, I want it to be kind of informal. But the book is mainly an examination of how these landmarks came to bear the name Gore, and sort of the timeline there. And it uses a lot of previously undiscovered source material, and that's all thanks to the digitization of old newspapers, which before, if you wanted to search for someone like Gore in an old newspaper from the 1800s, you would have to literally search. You would have to get on the microfilm and just read it. If you're lucky enough that perhaps there was maybe an index in that paper, sometimes you could get indexed pieces of reference, but to date, there has only ever been one mention of our protagonist, Sir St. George Gore, to be mentioned in an indexed newspaper article. And that one article is what most of the lore about Gore was based on, that and a few, just a few sparse other sources. So in total, we really only had 4 or 5 original pieces of source material about Gore to develop what we know about him. But now, after my research, we have more than 100 new pieces of source material to put together a more complete history of Gore. And so it takes place in the 1840s and 1850s, and then flashes forward to the 1870s. But there was, a few things that got cut out of the book, and that's kind of what we're going to talk a little bit about. And I think we're going to start just by one that gets into a little bit Gore's guide on the trip. And what makes Gore such a legend is that he chose to have his expedition. He wanted to come to this area to go on a hunting expedition, and he was a wealthy British aristocrat who could afford to do such a safari, as it would have been called in those days. And he wanted to hunt elk and buffalo and come out here to the west to do that. And he was smart enough to hire who would have been at the time an absolute celebrity of the West, Jim Bridger. And Bridger would have been one of the most well-respected mountain men in the West at the time. And to this day, we have a lot of, like Gore, we have a lot of namesakes named after Bridger, including the Bridger Wilderness, and skiers may know Bridger Bowl in Montana. And Jim Bridger was really well respected and kind of legendary. And part of the reason he was is because he could impress people so much with his like photographic memory, or I don't know if photographic is perhaps the right term. Audiographic might be better. Like he could recite things he had only heard once or twice, and he could just have and he had maps in his head of the West that were shown to be better than the maps of the actual physical maps of the day. And so Bridger really knew his way around. And Bridger showed Gore to this area here, northwest Colorado, and guided Gore into the Middle Park area where he hunted buffalo. And then Bridger said, on the other side of this mountain range here, the elk hunting grounds are really good in the Yampa Valley. And there was just a little footpath at the time getting around that mountain range to connect those two hunting grounds. And Gore said, well, this little footpath simply will not do. I need this widened into a massive wagon road so I can take my huge hunting party over this pass. And that act is what the reason why it's called Gore Creek today. That single act is what made Gore an absolute legend, because the single most important thing you could do that day to open up a region to more settlement would be to build a road over a mountain pass. And so, Gore did this purely for the pursuit of his recreational passions. And that's kind of probably what surprised Bridger the most. And so Bridger then named the road Gore Pass. And so that's why, when you drive on Gore Pass, State Highway 134 today, and you realize you're driving around the north end of the Gore Range and around those rugged peaks, it really makes sense to you to see how, well, if this road was called Gore Pass, what mountains is it getting around? The Gore Range. There's a big lake there. Call it Gore Lake. There's a creek coming out of it. Call it Gore Creek. Oh, they built a town next to the creek, and it's got a road next to the creek, Gore Creek. What should we call that? Call it Gore Creek Drive. It just goes on from there, but it's pretty logically named. And it was Bridger. Bridger was the one well-respected enough that when he called it Gore Pass, the name stuck. And that's how we get to where we are today. And I think the chronology there has been totally lost to the point where people are thinking that Gore Pass was just another mere spin-off of a name that was a range that was illogically named. And that's not it at all. Gore Pass is the original. The range is one of the spin-off names. So Bridger, so the story that I'm going to tell about Gore that it was lost to the cutting room floor, as this event is called. If I don't get back to Bridger at the end, someone please remind me, because this all kind of gets back to this point I'm making about Bridger's ability to impress people with his amazing mind. Gore, there is no picture of him. There's no journals from him. Before my research, there wasn't a single attributable quote to him, something that we could say he said this, he wrote this, something perhaps talking to a reporter who put quotes around it and said Gore said this. There was none of that. None of this existed. And I did find an entire court transcript and a pamphlet that Gore published, all in his own hand, all in his own words, so that we can really get an idea of who this man was by the way he spoke. And it got cut out of the book. And the reason why is he was so you couldn't understand the guy. He spoke, he was so highbrow and haughty, and the way that he spoke, the literary and cultural references that he would use, and the different ways that he would make his points were, it was just, it would have required so much additional explanation just trying to get to the point of what the heck Gore was even talking about. And then when you really dissect that, the whole court case that all this spun from was basically a guy got caught using an old field as grazing grounds, and someone said, "You can't put cows there. That grazing ground belongs to Sir Gore." And that guy said, "Sir Gore, he doesn't even really own it. I looked at the deed. It's Sir so-and-so, a different guy. And B, he's never even around here anyways. So why should he have it?" And Gore was so offended by this, that this commoner, this peasant who brought cows there, would dare question that his noble contacts, that he was allowed to use this land for basically for hunting, which was Gore's thing. So I'm going to read his response in this thing that he published, in this pamphlet that he published to try to get his side of the story out there. So this is what Gore wrote. And this is supposed to give you a better understanding of who he was, but you can see maybe why it was cut from the book. "The autocrat of the southwest of Kerry, the brilliant son of the author Irish Vagaries, may justly complain of his friends. He sinks lower under the historic adulation that Dalhuis, that great god of war, lieutenant general to the Earl of Mar, sank under the Scottish must. His worshipper is only a, quote, will o' the wisp to lead him deeper into the mire. The assumption of autocracy by service reminds us of, quote, high life below stairs, unquote. Lanso's vast inherited vestiary wealth does not authorize a servant to parade in his master's best suit." So what on earth is he talking about? And I'm going to the editors of this book. I got a great find here. The only known attributable quotes to Gore. And they're going, "Sorry, pal, you're going to ruin your book with this stuff." But I did actually go so far as to dissect what that means. And he's saying that this guy who wanted to use the empty field for grazing grounds, by this time it's the 1870s, and this guy, and there's starting to become there's less and less appetite for this landowner class in Ireland. This is post potato famine, and these guys, especially Gore, who was a villain of the famine, and that's like how he, the ill-gotten gains of those famine years are what he used to come here to the West and do his lavish hunting expedition. So now, by 1870s, the appetite for this type of stuff from these guys is just gone, and this guy is getting popular support in his argument that, hey, if this land isn't being used, why don't you let me graze my cattle there? And Gore is saying that his worshiper is only a will of the wisp to lead him deeper into the mire. A will of the wisp was like this old Irish ghost that would call you into the swamp. And so he's saying that, like, this guy, the people who are the popular support that this guy has for his common use of the land instead of leaving it to us aristocrats is a joke, and reminds us of High Life Below Stairs, which is like a play about peasants pretending to be aristocrats. So, so Gore, it just shows that the guy just sounds like a snob, a jerk, and just so the one time in his life that he's moved enough to like publish something, it's about this, and so, but to get to all of these, the lieutenant to the Earl of Mar, the great god of war, that he's referencing the first Marquis of Dalhousie, the British imperial administrator who was the governor general of India. He's the sixth Earl of Mar, John, who was part of the Jacobite uprising of 1715. He's referencing all this stuff in just this little passage. So the guy must be incredibly well read, and that's where we get to books are heavy. Have you ever tried to, like, you're moving all your important things? Oh, my books. I got to bring my books. Man, what a pain, I love this digital era of having a bunch of books in a Kindle, but there's a lot of books that aren't available that way. And I think we all know that, like, to bring books with you on a wilderness expedition is sort of, you must really be deep in the, like my son who's addicted to video games, he didn't start bringing the video games with on our camping trips until he was in the grips of this addiction, so he wouldn't, it took, when you're going camping and you have a Game Boy with you, that means that's means that thing is really important and you need to bring it with. And that's Gore. He's out in the wilderness and he's got all these books with him. He brought all these books on his expedition out here to Colorado and all these areas. And in his books, he would read to Bridger at night. And he would read him stuff like Hamlet and Shakespeare and stuff like that. And Bridger loved it. And he loved all these stories. And many years after the Gore expedition ended, Bridger's legend grew because he could recite Shakespeare. So Bridger lived in the wilderness for like 17 years straight and didn't eat a single grain of bread for like 11 of those years, I think. Survived purely on meat and had a big goiter and stuff. But this man was so removed from mainstream culture that these occasional reporters and people who would meet him when they would go out on these expeditions would be blown away by a guy reciting Shakespeare. Where on earth did you learn this? And it only added to Bridger's legend and made him this amazing kind of mind that he was remembered to be. And he learned the Shakespeare from the Gore expedition because Gore couldn't go without his books. He brought him into the wilderness with him. That shows that you're bringing the books with you deep camping like that, then you're not going anywhere without them. And John, do you have your Game Boy here with you? Oh, see, there it is, So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, he was only here for a short period of time, and he would have been, his hunting party would have been this roving hub of economic activity. If you heard Gore was in town, maybe you'd go try to sell him a few head of cattle to help feed the men and things like that. And so he was so he was remembered for that when he would leave. And in this area, he was said to have hired one of the tribes, but we don't know which one. It had to be on the one side of that grazing ground was the Ute. They resided in the Yampa Valley. And on the other side in Middle Park was the Arapaho. And effectively, that Gore Pass would have been a war path, basically, between these two tribes. And Bridger said, when asked, how on earth did this small party build a winding 25-mile road, not just cleared of trees, but graded too, through this wilderness? How on earth did they do that? And Bridger said, they hired 700 Indians. That was his answer. And it was always assumed that they were making their way west, and it was the Arapaho that he hired. But in my research, I found 3 different examples of people saying that they had already been to Fort Bridger in the southwest corner of Wyoming before arriving here. So they would have taken, to access this area, they would have came up the Grand River Valley and built it from west to east, hiring the Ute tribe. And to me, that makes more sense because this picture has never been explained of how these Ute men, this is kind of a famous picture that General Powell's guy, Hillers, took on the Powell expedition, which, by the way, Powell used Gore Pass to come out here, and that's how we get Mount Powell in the Gore Range today. And Hillers, and he brought a photographer with him. This was like 15 years after Gore had been through. And the photographer took these pictures of the Ute men, and here they are with these dogs that are not like the long-haired, wolf-like dogs that the Ute would have had at the time. These are English staghounds. I mean, that's what they are. And Gore was documented as leaving his expedition with 20 to 40 of those dogs and returning back 3 years later with none and using them for trade and things. So I think probably he did hire the Ute, trade with them for things like these dogs, and that's who actually built the Gore Pass. But yeah, no, he would have been kind of known wherever he went as like a mark. Like an easy money, like, oh, go sell that guy a horse, go sell that guy a cow, go see if he'll hire you to build a road along with everyone. So okay, so that was the one story I wanted to share about his pamphlet published. None of that made it into the book. The other thing that okay, so then the main other thing, okay, I'll tell a real quick one, and then I have one that I want to kind of close with. So there's another thing that I didn't get into, and it's he made one trip here that concluded in 1858, and he made another trip out here to the U.S. that began in 1870, would have been 20 years later, 1873. So what did Gore do in between this time, between 1858 and 1873? I do not get into that very much in the book because there isn't a whole lot of information on it. It seemed like he was kind of really interested in having the best show dogs and show animals, chickens, poultry, and things like that, horses. So most mentions of him in that time period were for winning events about who had the best specimen of chicken and things like that. But there's this really interesting story about how Gore, rather than try to find it, I'll just tell it. So it comes from that time period, and it's a guy looking back and remembering a bit about working for this guy named Gore who had the best poultry of the day. And the way he would, and the best horses and all the best, and the way he would do that is he would, whenever he saw a really good specimen, he would buy it no matter what the cost was. And he he had a odd habit that he would invite these animals into his living quarters, and he had a dog named New Trap. And that dog, New Trap, was the son of a dog that he loved named Old Trap, who was a winner of a bunch of dog showing awards. Okay? So this is just a guy in England who wrote this about Gore. He would have never had access to read what a different guy in the US wrote about Gore while he was on his expedition. He said he came across this horse that he said was the best horse he had ever seen here in the West, and he had bought it off the guy and already bought and paid for it. And then he bumped into the guy again and gave him, he had already paid $150 for this horse. And he bumped into the guy later and said, "This is the best horse ever, and it actually, you should have been charging $250 for this horse, so here's another $100, just so that I don't feel that I'm taking advantage of you." This is a documented story about Gore. And he named the horse not Old Trap or New Trap. He named the horse Steel Trap. And he let the horse sleep with him in his living quarters. And the story is almost identical to this other story from England later. And that is in the book, but I had this piece that got cut out about, and I think it's maybe a little too opinionated, but it's kind of about how Gore was, he didn't take much of a view of peasants and, those working for him, his servants and things. We never even so much as see these guys' names ever. And we kind of know from that document that his view of that kind of lower class. And there's also this story of him. He would say, "No, I hunted alone the whole time I was in the U.S." And people would be like, "Well, no, he didn't. He had like 6 guys with him. They would load his guns, and they would hand him the freshly loaded guns." And why is this discrepancy there? Well, to Gore, that is hunting alone. There's no other sportsman there clogging up his ranges and hunting. So these aren't even people to him. He would say, "I hunted alone in the U.S." So, but yet, but yet, when it comes to animals, he prizes them to the point that he sleeps with them in his living quarters. So it sort of shows this. I'd go so far as some of you might be thinking of the Hitler loved dogs thing, and I don't think it goes quite that far. But it's this weird thing about some of these aristocracy guys, putting more value, just sort of valuing the animal stock more than their own kind of servant class that works for them. So anyways, that got cut out of the book, probably for good reason. Okay, now here's the last part, and this is my exciting and dramatic conclusion, and this is kind of what got me on this whole book, and this is where we're going to get off the rails just a little bit here. So so what on earth could all of this have to do with this topic, the Disneyization of society? Well, I'm about to tell you, and for this conclusion, I'm going to take off. Some of you might be thinking, John looks like he bulked up a bit, but it's actually because I've been wearing this. As my daughter told me to say, "Oh, it just feels a little warm in here. Let me take off my sweatshirt." I'm going to put on a new hat for this last bit. So the topic that really got me interested in Gore, and how I started kind of writing about this, is on a totally different wavelength about living in Vail and how this very postmodern idea of Disneyfication or Disneyization is you really just feel it in this area. And in some areas that use the different elements of Disneyization to do things like attract tourists and create sort of a narrative to the area, it's not literal. But in our area, I actually grew up skiing with Goofy. Like so the Disneyization here is literal, and it's just sort of an amazing thing that the way that that this area where we live, not for good or bad, just as an observation, is so well fits into the elements of what is called Disneyization. Now, this author, Alan Bryman, wrote about this topic and it on purpose used this clunky term, Disneyization, rather than Disneyfication, because Disneyfication has sort of a negative connotation, and he wanted to approach it more from an academic standpoint. And so one of the things that Bryman did was clearly define exactly what Disneyization is. And it basically comes down to four components. And it's hybrid consumption, meaning consumption that can occur in multiple. A good example of hybrid consumption is sipping a big gulp while you peruse through the t-shirt rack. All right, you're doing two types of consumer consumption at once. Okay, hybrid consumption, but these aren't the important ones. Hybrid consumption, merchandising, performative labor, those ones aren't important to this study. What I'm going to talk about is the fourth component, theming. Okay, theming. Now, why this is such a postmodern concept is what modernism in art and otherwise is a seemingly original representation and a search for truth in something. So a modern example of American architecture is to go into the Midwest and take a walk down Main Street, USA, and find a small town and look at the way that the Main Street was built. That's an example of modernism, modern architecture. Postmodernism sees that Main Street and goes, we want it to look like that. So let's recreate that in a new Main Street that looks like the old Main Street. And the best example of that, of course, is in Disneyland itself, Main Street, USA. It's an attraction. You walk through the gates of Disneyland and you walk through a little town called Main Street, USA. So that idea in art here in our area, it isn't. You don't see it that often, because in Western art, it is a more modern pursuit. It seeks to show the true nature of what might have been happening out on the plains. And so here, what we have here as the most visual reminder of who Gore was is the Lord Gore Club at Manor Vail. It had it had art like this of Gore and his expedition all over the whole restaurant, and they had hired a Western artist, Jack Roberts, who would do modern Western scenes, and they hired Roberts to paint a lot of pictures of Gore. And Roberts got so well educated on Gore because he had to research him so much to paint his pictures that he decided, well, I'll just write a book about Gore. And he says right in this book, in the foreword, a lot of I've done the best research I could, but a lot of the stuff that I don't know, I just made up. So he said he used the word surmised, and so this has been kind of frustrating for people like myself and others who want to kind of get to the truth of what actually, that's like what inspired me to write my book, is, to sort of separate the fact from the fiction there. Well, Roberts, in being hired by Manor Vail to create all this work about Gore, he felt like he was taking on another assignment to create some modern artwork. But actually, this was a very postmodern assignment, because his artwork would be used to theme the new restaurant and private club at Manor Vail. It had a spa and a health club and pools and saunas, and it was private. And in that era of the 1960s, in a vacation town like this, you couldn't you could but if you were on the cutting edge of your the latest trends in the vacation world, you would have themed your club. And so at this time, we're in the post theme park world, and even, you go to the shopping mall and it's called the Gardens, and it's themed like a garden. Theming is just huge at this point. And so Gore's expedition is used as to create theming here in Vail. And within this atmosphere, at Manor Vail, there are different elements of the expedition, including there's a conference room called the Jim Bridger Room. The lounge is called Fitzwilliam's Lounge because Roberts mistakenly thought that a guy named Fitzwilliams accompanied Gore on this journey, and I was able to prove that he didn't. They were together at the same time in St. Louis, and people were saying, I saw it wasn't just Gore who was trying to recruit me to come on his expedition. There was another guy with him, Fitzwilliams, and that's true. But then Fitzwilliams left, and Gore continued on. But Roberts didn't know that and just assumed Fitzwilliams was with on the entire expedition. And Manor Vail called it the Lord Gore Club with its Jim Bridger Room and its Fitzwilliams Lounge. And it had all this artwork and everything all around. It was absolutely an effort of theming in our post Disney world. And I think like the best definition of theming is in this book. It's theming is the application of a narrative to institutions or locations. In infusing objects with meaning through theming, they are deemed to be made more attractive and interesting than they otherwise would be. And so that is really what happened with Gore in this area. His legend really grew because you would go into this Manor Vail, and Gore it really was a brilliant work of theming, because you were in the Vail was new at the time. There wasn't that much development, much less amenities here, and you were in a howling wilderness out here. It felt like, and the comforts of how are you going to apply the comforts and the luxury to a wilderness? When was that ever done? Well, Gore did that, actually. So he's the perfect person to theme our luxury vacation club out here in this wilderness. So later on, this stuff starts to get demystified, and Gore starts to be more seen as excessive. And indeed he was. He killed thousands of animals and was accused of only using just hunting them for sport and things like that. And I think, some of that's got to be true, but we know for a fact he did keep some of these trophies and even bring them back to England. Well, the Brighton Museum had a giant elk head for a long time. And so, little bit of trophy hunting too, not that that's any better. But the question I sort of raised is, like, how could a guy survive for 3 years out in the wilderness with 40 people in his company? And be hunting all this game and not be eating the meat. So, of course he had to be, but he was seen as excessive. And that the whole idea of Gore as the namesake of your restaurant, started to kind of wear on Manor Vail, and they got rid of the Lord Gore moniker, and they got rid of the Jim Bridger room, and they kind of, all these paintings and things are sort of like put in a closet, not out on display anymore and any of that. But the funniest thing happened, and and if you go there today, there is one little remnant left. If you go there, and that is the name of the cocktail lounge is called the Fitz, and it is just a name, the Fitz, the Fitz Lounge. Well, it used to be called Fitzwilliam's Lounge, named after a guy who was mistakenly thought to accompany. So the one name that has stuck through the years and still remains to this day at this great act of Gore theming is the one that wasn't actually there to begin with. So, so I think in a post theme park world where the Disneyization of society is everywhere you look, I think, Lord Gore and the Lord Gore Club would go on to become so much of our conception of this man, right or wrong. I mean, a lot of it is just straight up wrong, that I did feel it was important to just get the proper story, the true story, well cited. I have like 250, citations in the book, and kind of get it out there properly. So yeah, that's it. Let's have some questions. Chris Anthony, thank you for joining us. How lucky we are to have a fellow storyteller, Chris. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Oh, sorry. Right. Yeah. Okay. Question is, like, how how does Gore get all of this vast wealth across the pond, and how does he continue to travel with it? And he would have everything shipped from England at $400 a shipment, and brought up the Mississippi River by steamer, and a steamer would roll up to the in St. Louis, and it'd be just filled with 18 dogs, and Gore would be like, "Oh, those are mine," and there was reports of this coming in the newspaper, so that's how he built everything up. And he was bringing stuff that people had never seen before, different things used for going across streams and things, and futuristic technology. He was sort of like, he was really, I call him in the book a Napoleon-like figure for outdoor recreation. I mean, he spread he evolved outdoor recreation wherever he traveled. Like Napoleon was history on horseback. Gore, due to all these luxury accoutrements, was a history on horseback like figure for outdoor recreation. And so he would have been known for fancy guns that no one would ever seen. In fact, one of them he sold. It is on display at the Blair House across from the White House. But he didn't care about any of it. He didn't. He for most of the expedition, he didn't really. There was a few times of some horse robbing and some things like that. Then he was said to have been robbed by the Sioux at one point, and but a lot of his belongings, he got in a disagreement with the fur traders about how he was going to get all these belongings back down the Missouri River into St. Louis. He just burned them all. He didn't care. He lived for the entire last like 6 months of this. He lived in Chief Crowsbreast residence in a mud hut in the Hidatsa tribe up in modern day North Dakota with nothing. And the chief thought this traveler was interesting, and gave him his residence to use. And it seemed he had good relations with most native tribes and things. But he But yeah, he didn't care about all that stuff. He would rather burn it than get taken advantage of by the fur trading companies. So he, from where it came, there it goes. He just, yeah. So he traveled with all this stuff and then just, didn't care. And then when he got back to St. Louis, he started stocking up again, getting all his old contacts from England to mail new guns and things. And then he went on another hunting expedition in the eastern part of Missouri after this one was over, and he was rumored to have killed 8,000 birds in that hunting expedition. So the guy was insane. Yeah. All right. Well, he didn't acquire any land in Colorado. He was a wealthy owner back in uh, Ireland, which was essentially colonization by the English. But and he was part of that landed aristocracy back in England. But here he just um, moved through the West. He didn't acquire anything. Oh, that took place in Ireland. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I might not have mentioned that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. That is there's an ongoing effort to rename the Gore Range. It'll be before the Geographic Naming Board in May, and the arguments for renaming the Gore Range are that uh, Gore doesn't reflect the values of conservation in this area, and that he doesn't didn't make a significant contribution to the community here. And if a landmark is to be named after a person, that person is supposed to have made a significant contribution to the community here. And then I think the the I think the effort isn't seeming to get all that much traction thus far, but still could. But several people, Kim Langmaid, who was former town mayor of Vail, read my book and changed her mind about that, and said on the record at a city council debate that she no longer supports the renaming of the Gore Range because the argument that Gore didn't make a significant contribution to the area is wrong. He built that road, and that road opened up the settlement of Northwest Colorado. So many people are documented using it afterwards. So, um, yeah. Well, during his first expedition here, he seemed to be generally kind of revered as a superhero like figure from the future. Like it was just mind blowing to see a guy moving through the West with this roving city and doing it purely for the pleasure of his recreational pursuits. Like I think back to the naming argument, you know, Gore is the first wealthy tourist to come to this area seeking outdoor recreation. Okay, so is it improperly named Gore Creek, or is it the most perfect name that you can have? Like that is totally prescient there. And so that's what he was seen as an oddball during that first expedition. But now, between 1850 and 1870, things sort of are starting to change in the U.S., where the limeys are seen as, at first they were more kind of respected, and then this is like, I think it's kind of, this is also the time when like Webster and the other guy were fighting over getting the U.S. getting its own dictionary, and we were kind of in between 1850 and 1870. He like attitudes changed towards the British, and we're kind of now Americans are sort of looking at them as like kind of, you know, just cartoony kind of buffoon like guys. And so now Gore comes back to the US on a whole nother hunting expedition in the 1870s, and at that time he's just getting roasted in the papers. He's like, it's like totally a different attitude. So yeah, I think the first time he's among his contemporaries back in England, where he would hunt on the highlands and the moors of Scotland, I mean, he was part of what was seen as a highly respectable assemblage of sportsmen that were, you know, these were the pro outdoor recreation athletes of their day. He was like it's like you know, like today, like how do you have a pro kayaker, you know? Well, he has product sponsorships. He is able to travel around and get mentions in different publications and things, and sort of keep this going with these sponsorship and things. Gore was the same. There would be advertisements in the paper saying like, this gun was used by Sir Gore, and he killed, you know, was able to kill 6 roe deer in 6 shots using our gun. So he was like a pro outdoor recreation athlete of that day. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Well, yeah. So that's you know, recreation that is seen to be harmful or abusive towards the environment has been termed recreation. WRECK. So that's my kind of little. That's one that didn't get cut out of the book, where I was able to maybe kind of have, I don't know, maybe it's good or maybe it's not that clever, but I do think Gore absolutely was a Napoleon like figure for outdoor recreation. The way Napoleon traveled, it was history on horseback. He traveled on that horseback and he spread these ideas of revolution wherever he went. That's what Gore was doing. Gore would visit a town in England, and they had never seen a gigantic punt gun that could kill 60 birds with one shot. That's a real gun. John, Andrew, who works at the ski museum here, drew this picture. And yeah, that my own publisher said we can't use that picture. It's not realistic. I said no. On contraire, every detail down to the shoes tucked into the boots and what kind of shoes. This is all based on new descriptions of Gore that only I was privy to. Andrew has created the most historically accurate drawing of Gore ever, because no pictures exist, and the gun is a real gun. And so Gore would go around and he would you know, change outdoor recreation in the places where he went. And so I, instead of calling, but what was this thing that he liked to do? Kill 60 birds with one shot. I mean, he was, so if there was a recreation WR figure, I mean, he was it also. So if Napoleon's history on horseback, Gore is recreation on vacation. That was my kind of little, you know, I don't know, clever little thing that I wrote in the book that I was able to, yeah, break out of the confines of journalism modern to do that. Yes. Um, yeah, no, it was no, it was the opposite. He didn't want to be he didn't want to be he kind of wanted to not he wanted to keep a low profile because for probably for a lot of reasons, among them just the 1850. If you were a wealthy landowner in Ireland in 1848, and you're traveling around the world hunting and all these things, you are among the like villains of history. You know, I mean, so like the the way that he gets so much notoriety is just simply because um the people who joined him on this expeditions, they talked about it afterwards. otherwise, we have nothing from the man himself. Bob, you had a question? Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. I think I don't. I just. I guess I just don't know that he had that need to display as much as to achieve. I think he did want to be out there, the guy who killed the most deer last weekend. But I, I don't. I I think that he more did it for the actual that these things get addicting, and all of us know that. You start getting out there, and I'm going to get into hiking a little. Has any of you done that? And then you just don't want to leave that trail, and if you have the time and the funds to get into a sport like that is b- breaking ground technologically as you're doing it, and every year or two the new gun or something is released that and a new way of doing this sport more and better. I think he was just that he was one of these guys, like so many people that we know in the ski town, who yeah, he was just really loved killing animals. Yeah, that's been one of the great questions, and it's always been assumed that he learned about it from I'm going to say his name here. Well, two people. The one person, Fitzwilliams, who we talked about at the restaurant, he was wrapping up an expedition as Gore was beginning his. So it's Gore had already went from he had hunted his way from Canada to Mexico, traveled the entire U.S. from north to south, was back up, heading back north again in St. Louis when he bumps into this guy, Fitzwilliams, and that guy likely says to him, "Oh, I just got back from the West. It was amazing out there." But the other person who it's it's long been assumed because he had such a couple of high profile adventures in the West is Sir William Drummond Stewart, who was a Scottish baronet, like Gore was an Irish baronet, and he made two expeditions out west and brought like a writer to chronicle his expeditions and stuff. And so Drummond Stewart, that's a really interesting connection between him and Gore, because the 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 two of these expeditions had and did have a lot in common, and things, and perhaps the sort of the motivation to get away in the first place. And so if you can, there's a really good study of called Men in Eden, a book that I base a lot of my research on, about Drummond Stewart and why he wanted to go out west to begin with. And it's because he was gay. So yeah. So anyways, that's it, Gore one of his assumed to be the people that told him about this whole Western adventure was Drummond Stewart. Drummond Stewart really enjoyed visiting the camps of the Crow tribe, who was openly tolerant of homosexuality, and Gore made his first person that he contacted when he got to St. Louis was another man that was sort of part of this community. And so yeah, that's something I haven't mentioned on any time. This is actually my last talk, and that's like my big kind of truth bomb in chapter 8. Is so it's like, so I just thought, as I was sitting here, I thought, you know what, this is my last talk. I'll tell him, like, but that's actually like what I think is kind of some of the biggest discoveries that I made are just the little stories of him bathing with his servants and deliberately seeking out this crow camp and these sort of things, and him just going. It's kind of unusual that you would have that much inherited wealth and you would never marry and produce an heir to give that on to. That in itself is really weird. And so he just sort of kind of fits the stereotype of these men who sought an Eden in the West where they could be openly gay in the crow camps and not be free from the persecution of society. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, you're wrapping it up. Okay. Yeah. Oh, it's 7. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Thank you, John. We appreciate that. Learned some good stuff here. Before we head out, thank you again for being here. If you need to grab one of his books, we do have some over there. Or if you want to talk membership, Whitney's around, and we've got info. I think, Chris, you want to plug a little event, I heard? Here.
We're doing a last minute sort of add-on. I think it's going to be like kind of a through the lens on April 3rd. Because of current events that are going on in Iran, I have a segment that I did with Warren Miller that was barely seen by anybody. It's a full show, and I spent 3 weeks with Warren Miller Entertainment in Iran, so we're going to show that. And then I have 2 Iranian friends that they become members of the museum. They defected out of Iran. They're going to join me, and it'll be a great conversation, I think. One of them, the wife just got her mom 3 weeks ago out of Iran, so they have a very good inside of what's taking place. So I think the combination of this Warren Miller journey into Iran and the backstory of that, and along with these 2 people that are the inside track, could be a very intriguing conversation.
Right. Yeah, we'll get some information about that soon. It's like you said, it was kind of a last add-on there, so we'll get some stuff out there. But yeah, thank you guys for being here. You can either, if you want to, everyone always worries about their dishes. If you've got them in your hand, you can set them on our front desk. We'll take care of them as well. And like I said, we have books if you need them. Whitney's around if you want to talk about membership. And even though Through the Lens is over, there's lots of other things that happen throughout the year and fun things around. So don't be shy, even though we don't have Through the Lens, guys. We really appreciate your support. Have a great night.